So let's now dive into why we think bulk payments in merge loop are different. So merge loop has a DFSP to DFSP non-repudiation signature. This is different from other switches, which often do a DFSP to hub or to switch non-repudiation signature. And in merge loop, we feel it's to keep the costs low, it's really important to have a DFSP to DFSP non-repudiation signature. And what that means is that messages are routed unchanged between DFSPs. In the bulk use case, there is one exception, and I'm going to dive into that in more detail right now. So in this diagram, on the left, we got the payer DFSP. On the right, we got the payee DFSP and merge loop in the middle. And really, the bulk functionality has two resource endpoints. There's a bulk quote and a bulk transfer, and I'm really only going to be talking about those messages. So the payer DFSP sends a request for a bulk quote directly to the payee DFSP using the bulk post-bulk quotes resource. And then the payee DFSP builds up the terms of the transfer and replies to them in the bulk and the put bulk quotes resource. And these are DFSP to DFSP non-repudiation messages. So they are not altered at all and passed directly through the switch. If these terms are acceptable, the payee DFSP accepts them with a post bulk transfer message. And here we don't preserve the non-repudiation signature DFSP to DFSP. We do DFSP to hub and hub to payee DFSP. And the reason why we do that is because we do a liquidity check inside merge loop. And a decision was made that should one of the bulk transfer fail inside the bulk message, we would still want to continue to send the other transfers. So we'd leave that one transfer that failed the liquidity check out of the checks. So there's also a note here is that the liquidity checks are done at a transfer level. They're not done together as a bulk message. So so we didn't choose an all or nothing. We chose we want to send what we can with this bulk message. And because of that decision, it would be inappropriate to send through a bulk post-bulk transfer message to the payee DFSP should one of those transfers not be not have passed the liquidity check. So so we do re-sign the message. Michael, you got
Yeah, I
your
just
hand
wanted
up.
to say that it seems to me that that's something which must be variable by the sender, mustn't it? I mean, surely the sender, rather than the scheme, should decide whether they are prepared to accept payment of some people but not others.
Yes, a good point. That is not what we got at the moment, but is something that has been questioned in the past, the decision to do that. But right now, the way it works, the way bulk transfer works is that is it only works one way. It sends everything. It's not an all or nothing. No, it sends what passes that liquidity check and it breaks the non-repudiation signature. DFSP to DFSP on the post bulk transfer message. Now, Miller, you've also got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make a point that the original design around bulk quote was to recognize that the payer wishes to process and manage, they wish to manage a batch of payments at a time. It won't be the entire thing. It's going to be a batch. And yet the Mojaloop wants to process the payments one by one. So there should be no difference in the end for a payment that was part of a batch and that which was not part of a batch, but processed individually as far as the Mojaloop clearing and settlement engine is concerned, which means that if the sending side, if it's coming from multiple accounts on the sending side, some of the things in the quote might succeed and some might not on the liquidity check. Likewise, you can run out halfway through a batch of liquidity and can't complete the rest of the batch. So you do have to process those things. But then as you look at the rest of this, once a transaction is posted for transfer, it's independent as far as Mojaloop is concerned from the rest of the batch. It either succeeds or fails on its own, and the results have to be rolled up and reported back. But for that to work, because you have payee DFSP here as the bulk quote in a pass-through case, we have to do what we call sort at source. That is, the individual sender has to sort these by the payee DFSP. So you can't send in this complete mixed batch of stuff with a signature wrapped around it because it would be going to different DFSPs. And yes, thank you. You do have that. So now I will shut up and let you continue.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thanks, Miller. One point that I would like to make is this breaking the DFSP into DFSP to DFSP non-repudiation on the post bulk transfer. That is, in fact, the least important message to have DFSP to DFSP non-repudiation in place. And that might sound a bit strange, but the reason for it is the post bulk transfer is in fact an acknowledgement of an agreement that's already in place, and it's in putting that agreement in place in the quotes phase where the checking is in fact important. Because you won't accept a transfer that doesn't correspond to a previous agreement that you have. So because you've got the non-repudiation in the quotes phase, it's less important to have it inside the bulk transfer phase. So I do think that this pattern still works. Um, and like you said, Miller, this grouping of payer to have this end-to-end non-modified message, the payer DFSP needs to group all the transfers according to payee DFSP. And that means that they have had to previously done discovery to all the recipients and done this grouping exercise, which also means that the payer DFSP really does most of the work inside this use case. Sam, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, wanted to confirm before we move too far from that is on the codes side of things. We cannot provide non-repudiability between DFSP because I think the nature of it is that in the lookup phase, these belong to different DFSPs. So the batch that belongs to a particular DFSP needs to go to that. So the initiating or the pay DFSP has to draft different bulk quotes messages based on the payee DFSP in each case. So I think there is a consideration there which necessitates this exception. And I think to confirm what Miller was saying earlier as well, the framework that we use internally to cater or clear these transfers is we deal with this at the individual transfer level, and the messaging supports that as well.
Sorry.
Yes, I
Thanks.
think we're saying the same things.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Okay,
Sorry, guys.
just checking.
I checked out for a little bit because I was looking at the chat, but just how does the payer DFSP know what the payee DFSP is going to be?
They do discovery.
Oh, okay. So they just do multiple. Okay.
So I haven't put the discovery call in here. There isn't currently a bulk discovery call, but that's actually not so important because in order to do the sorting, each recipient needs to be queried beforehand.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And the point here to make is that this is just the payment part of a larger process called campaign management. And campaign management starts with database creation and database scrubbing and maintenance. And so ALS part of that is a one-by-one thing. Someone says, I'd like to receive my benefits payments in this account. That's a person to government interaction. There will be batch cases where they're going to onboard everybody all at once. But in doing that, they're still going to go line by line and figure out who they bank with and whether or not they can receive instant payments. So that part of campaign management is outside of Mojaloop. We make the ALS calls available, but there's no bulk ALS as far as I know. Someone could argue back to us and say, "Oh, actually, it would be super easy if we could have that." I suppose, but I don't think we've heard that yet.
I don't think there's a big advantage either. I agree with you, Miller. So even if you're doing the salary bulk, um, you got to pre-check that your list is correct. There's a due diligence that needs to happen, and you need to go through that.
Yeah, sorry. And then one more maybe also basic question is how does this still work in the case that Paul showed before when you hooked up to MOSIP and you're using tokens? I guess it does because you just do a lookup on the token and what DFSP it's going to go to.
Just a form of identification, like any
Yeah.
other.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
No
cool.
different. And it even works in inter-scheme.
Mm.
Well, not the bulk message itself, but the discovery does right now.
Mm.
Okay, so let's have a look at the current state of bulk functionality and development. So on the GTP side, government to person and NGO to person, we currently that currently is completed, right, and is available in release module 17. It doesn't have ISO 20022 support, and it doesn't have inter-scheme support yet. So there are some gaps there, but it is completed functionality. On the second use case, the bulk payments use case, Michael, you got your hand up.
All right, I'm just going to say that the ISO messages support multiple payments by default. I mean, that's just what they're like.
Yes. I don't think the mapping is going to be a problem, or it's going to be hard to put into place. It's just a work item that hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
I'd want to point out too that I think it's a decision point, although one you might traverse quickly, as to whether you generate individual messages in the ISO format or whether you generate the aggregate message form of those ISO messages, because they were designed for that. But the question is, do I really want to have one XML file with 10,000 payments in it?
As opposed to
10,000 messages that each individually can be processed or not processed. Because remember, we're not processing it as a bulk, we're processing individual payments.
But then we don't need a bulk service.
No, that's not true. You're allowing the DFSPs to interact with you on a bulk basis, but we, as the switch itself, are going to process those payments. That is, we're going to uh, request fulfillment, receive fulfillment confirmation, commit for settlement against whatever settlement model was established one by one, not as a bulk. And we may do that in a way that's unique and individual to the bulk payment API path to simplify things or optimize, but there shouldn't be a difference at the line level, the individual line level. So that's the question. Do we really want to introduce aggregate messaging for that purpose, or would we want to aggregate individual messaging? It's the same thing. You're still sending a whole batch of messages, but I don't know the answer to that.
My feeling is, having done some work on the ISO messaging, is the way they manage the bulk is pretty elegant. And I think there's the right level of separation there. So I would just do a direct conversion between the bulk quotes and the bulk transfer message into a standard ISO payload.
Which is a bulk ISO payment, you mean?
Which is a bulk ISO payment, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd love to noodle on that and see what that looks like. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there is a rule on the ISO payment message that says you can set the beneficiary at a header level. And if you do, you're not allowed to set the beneficiary at the individual transfer level. Sorry, I mean the beneficiary DFSP, the agent. So that means you can constrain a message to say you may only contain payments where the beneficiary is this DFSP. I think I'm right in saying that.
Okay, that's a really good mapping between our current message. Okay. So on the bulk payment, the next use case, the bulk payment, the salary payment. Um, Currently, this functionality is available, but it requires the DFSPs to pre-organize their bulk into pay DFSP and process them separately. So in other words, more back-end or core back-end functionality changes is required in order to process this. And then on the PASP bulk payment side, we have a design in place, and it's been presented to the DA. There seems good acknowledgement that it's the way to go forward at the moment. And what it does is it actually takes advantage of the bulk payment use case that's been represented here. So it is just a layer on top of that to have a PASP way of initiating that same payment. So next, I want to look at the contribution opportunity. So where are the gaps? And this is how I see them right now. So in the G2P government to person use case or NGO to person use case, if we added functionality to break the bulk apart on the payee DFSP side, this would mean that payee DFSPs wouldn't need to implement a bulk payment integration. They could take advantage of their current single payment integration, and so they wouldn't need to especially put something in place for bulk. I think if I remember the designs correctly for this, if it is done well, if they do implement a bulk payment mechanism, so if the core backend provider supports it, it would take advantage of it because obviously less messages is useful. It means that we can respond quicker and there's less work to be done. So if a bulk, so essentially it becomes a choice when the integration is built as to whether they would like to integrate bulk or not, and all DFSPs by default would be supporting bulk payments. So it is a big unlocker, so worth considering. And then the next 2 points is support for ISO 20022 and adding support for interscheme. I think those are relatively small efforts compared to the other one. On the next use case, the bulk payments use case for salaries, I propose the way forward on that would be to update the current G2P solution in a way so that it can run on much smaller DFSPs. So maybe it's worth mentioning the elephant in the room here, which is Kafka. So the G2P solution requires Kafka, and it's certainly done in a way that the infrastructure or the Kafka integration is decoupled. So it can easily be replaced with another messaging solution, and one that is maybe more appropriate for smaller DFSPs to be running in their backend systems. So that's what I think the effort should be, and bulk payments for um, for salary payments. Then on the PSP bulk payments, we've got a design in place, but what's still outstanding is we need to update the PSP version 2 to include this new bulk resource, a bulk transaction resource, and then actually do an implementation of that bulk transaction resource. So those are all the gaps the way I see it. Let me jump quickly to the next slide, and then I'll jump back. So next, I think we should choose one of those gaps, and then we can try and build an epic around it. So what I think we should do is put a value statement together, maybe add some background, some scope, talk about the scope, add some references and some acceptance criteria around delivery on one of those value state, one of those gaps. So I'm going to jump back and ask really everyone out there. I'm certainly interested in potential adopters and people who are interested in making use of the bulk payment. Is where do they think the biggest gap is, where they would like the next effort in this work stream to be focused on?
I'm going to call Phil out because I think he's indicating that Zambia would be interested in this if it were properly designed for their cases. And that might be a good place to start contribution, is to outline how this various aspects of this might work in the Zambia context without committing them. Of course, we can't do that, but it would give us
Yeah.
some access to your inside views, Phil.
Yeah, so I think certainly for our proof of concept, the Smart Zambia Institute have asked for PISP bulk payments. The issue that they have right now is that they have to connect to multiple different DFSPs to execute bulk payments, even though we have interoperability. And the reason for that is that, different DFSPs will offer different pricing. And so they really want PISP because they can then just have one connection for bulk payment, and then they can sort out the rest. They can have multiple DFSPs that payer DFSPs that they're using. The only where I'm a little bit reticent, so that's what I'd definitely like to see, but because I'm not that clued up in the space, I don't know how much I can sort of add to the conversation. And then the other issue is just to be upfront, is that this is only for a proof of concept. So if there were somebody else in the room right now that has a requirement for an implementation that's already live, say for example ISO 222 support, maybe in Rwanda, maybe that would be more pressing. But I would certainly enjoy. I would be happy if we did look at PISP bulk payments.
Well, I think that's great, Phil. I think that honestly, I treat POCs as live pilot. So for me, if the POC goes smoothly, then you have one example of how this might be done. That doesn't obligate anybody to proceed, but at the same time, it's helping everybody because we had to design for a specific, set of use cases that allow for this. And the government to person is an important one. I think some of the aspects of what we have to build out, Michael and I were chewing on a different tree in the chat here, but I think that we definitely want to get to how the settlement strategy works. Governments are not going to lift up 50 million US and deposit it in a commercial bank just so that they can settle a bulk payment. They're going to want to settle directly, government direct to DFSP. And that means that there has to be some set of settlement agreements in place where the special case of the government is that they essentially have an unlimited net debit cap, but we have to give a net debit cap to Mojaloop so it can operate. And so there has to be some strategy for that. And of course, when it comes to settlement, it's not settled through the common settlement arrangement used between DFSPs. It would be settled through special rails, direct to government in some fashion. So one has to design, at least in wireframe, what that would look like. And if there are any divergence from that to our existing settlement models, then we'd want to capture that as well.
Yeah, and
Actually,
that's
carry on.
sorry, just quickly in the Zambian context, I think we have two use cases. So currently, I think many of the social cash transfers, the money is actually moving to a commercial bank, but they don't necessarily want to do that. I'm not, I'm not crystal clear on that, but that's, I think they want to move more to a model that's more like Rwanda, where I think it all comes from a separate part of the central bank. But then there's another use case where at sort of the municipality level, which is, just much smaller payments, they are paying from commercial banks. So it's still G2P, but it's much smaller. So there's kind of almost two use cases that they're looking at.
Yeah, no, that's right. And
Yeah,
that my point is
yeah,
only that commercializing central bank money is a process that's normally reserved to commercial banks. But that doesn't mean you do it the
mm,
same way. It doesn't mean the government actually is going to commercialize $50 million and then make a commercial money deposit. They're going to actually
yeah,
go to one of their issuing banks and say, I would like you to issue 50 million US on demand from the following payees with appropriate documentation. So it's not a, yeah. So, and as you said, I don't think that even if they had to do it today to actually do the commercialization of the money and then put it on deposit as a, as a commercial operation, they certainly don't want to do that. So there has to be some
yeah,
strategy for managing the settlement and reservations process within Mojaloop so that we know that we're reserving against money that isn't going to be withheld later, so that Mojaloop can meet its obligations and goals, but that settlement can proceed in a way that the government will tolerate. Um, over.
yeah.
Uh,
Yes, Michael.
so two things really. First of all, we did actually build in the capacity by settlement model to override the requirement for a liquidity check. So that some settlement models would not require the switch to do a liquidity check. And the reason we did that, if people are still interested, is because in cases where people were using foreign exchange providers, the foreign exchange providers were requiring them to hold liquidity cover with them. So effectively, if we had asked the switch to hold it as well, we would have required it twice from the DFSPs, and that's why we did that. But what it means is that effectively, in the case of a government which was disbursing payments, we could do that according to a settlement model, which would, going back to Miller's original point, which would not require uh, liquidity checking to take place. And that would mean effectively that what we would be saying, as I said in the chat, is that the government is a participant in the scheme which settles to the creditor institutions when required to do so. But because it is the government, you can trust it, and there doesn't need to be any commercial bank providing liquidity cover to cover the cover, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, although it could also be that it's arithmetically mechanical. That is, we still go through a reservation, but it doesn't fail. And so the reason for that is that we want the operations console to show the position the government is taking at any time.
Mm.
Otherwise, you have no way to tap that. There's no account for it. So I think we still want that. I'm just
And
saying
that would, that would still happen in the case that we're talking about. There would still be a reservation, but as you say, the liquidity check itself
it's just not
would
going to
not be
fail.
done. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the old magic -1 for the the Sentinel value for the net
No,
debit
no,
cap.
we got a proper flag on it. Also,
Uh, Fair enough. So I think there's a couple of different ways of looking at this. It would be useful to inform ourselves, though, from current practice to be sure that we're not essentially overachieving by giving them something they do ultimately want, but that would find difficult to implement today. And I don't think we will. I think from what Phil was describing, it sounded like they can operate as though they were in the commercial realm as part of the scheme, even though they don't really want to. You could certainly show that. But if it's a proof of concept, I don't see any risk at actually saying, yeah, but here's how we think it ought to work, because it leaves the money in place at Treasury. It doesn't have to actually move until
Mm.
it's actually funding out. And your idea of treating the government as a special participant in the scheme is not a bad one. That they may not be the only ones. There may actually be other cases like that too, where you're tying
Absolutely.
a participation to a specific settlement model.
Well, NGOs would be an example, I guess.
Yeah, they could well be, even though in that case they'll be using commercial banks to pay.
Hmm.
But it maybe that's the only reason that commercial bank is in there. They're not a general participant. They're just there to facilitate this.
Exactly. But what you're
Yeah.
saying is that effectively the test that's being made is not does the DFSP have those amounts have those funds on deposit such that I can guarantee they can be used in settlement, but does the NGO have those funds on deposit?
Yeah. Has the NGO said that those funds are available? There's a limit to how much checking you can do. I mean, for example, UNHCR settles their accommodations through UBS, right? So UBS makes the payments for UNHCR, and they do that because they're given a campaign file and told who to pay, and then they go about doing their best job at making those payments. If they can't make them, they report back that some payment couldn't be made. But there's never going to be a case where UBS can't meet its obligation under that arrangement.
Sure. And therefore, you can say the participant is UBS, but they are operating according to a settlement model which does not require liquidity checking.
That might be a way to look at it. And this is something we'd want to process with UBS directly, I think, and say,
Hmm.
if we were to do this, how would you step into this role? Should we be thinking of you and the NGO together? Is it UNHCR and you acting together as the participant, or are they separate roles?
Yeah,
And it would be interesting to process that. I'd also like to process Phil's example, both how it is now and how they would, and the aspects of it that they don't particularly like, to see if we can't address that.
hmm, yeah, agreed.
I think from that emerges the epic that will describe these different cases. I mean, obviously, a large airline is not likely to use this mode. They're going to use a commercial bank, even though it's still a ton of money to make their payroll. It's still a commercial bank that's doing it. They're not a special participant in that regard.
But they might still want a way. I mean, it seems to me this is quite a standard thing that someone who is making a bulk payment would want. They would want to say, I've got the funds. I'm not asking you to make the payment without my having the funds in my account. What I don't want to happen is for you to get in the way of my transferring those funds, which the liquidity check might do.
Well, it might, but then again, if it interfered with it because it says you don't have the money, then I really don't want to proceed. Because the,
No, I
tr the
understand.
tricky part
What I'm
is
saying.
that you remember the tricky part here is that the scheme may in fact be a government entity or a pseudo-government entity, whereas the airline is not. And
No,
so
no,
you have
but
to be careful about the administrative boundaries here and say, look, I get that you're a large entity and you do really good things with your money, but there are also cases where there can be legal challenges and frozen funds. And so we really do want to just follow the straightforward path. We need traceability at the switch on a line by line basis. And so uh, agreeing
absolutely,
that we've reserved the funds when in fact we haven't is going to create problems later.
I
This is
agree.
what happens
So,
with wire payments today, right? So when you make a wire payment through chips or chaps, everything's fine until it's not. And then at the end of the day, somebody makes a liquidity call, and the bank that provided support for the airline also provided support for 15 other really large companies, and they had a liquidity problem. They didn't know it at the time, but they do now. And so we don't want to end up in that circumstance. And I think that has to be walked through specifically.
Yeah, but the sort of thing I'm thinking about is to say, well, if I'm an airline and I want to run my payroll, I need to have those funds somehow available to my bank, or I couldn't run the payroll. And my bank, it's okay for my bank to satisfy itself at the time when I want to make the payment that I'm good for those funds.
Well, but that no, they have to be good for them in a way that Mojaloop agrees that they're good for them, because
I
they can come
understand
up
that.
with all kinds of random bilateral agreements that we are not party to that fail, and they will
Yeah,
go resolve them when they take their sweet time to do it. We're saying no, it's an instant payment, which means that we need to know in advance that the money is actually available and will actually settle, and that it won't cause the payment to become repudiated or derailed.
yeah,
And so that's the difference. And it's going to require us to process in a fairly detailed fashion, I think, to really walk through that. Not just I'm good for it, which undoubtedly you are at a very high level, but the way in which you become liquid is not necessarily as straightforward as what we've modeled for Mojaloop.
yeah. But I think what we're saying, or I think what we would want to say, is that I agree. I'm not trying to say that we should circumvent any of the processes that Mojaloop puts in place rightly to ensure that people really do get the funds that they're entitled to. What I want to do is to make sure that the customer on the other end, the airline in this case, doesn't get derailed because the bank isn't on the case properly and a large sum needs to be disbursed. And for one reason or another, not all of it can be disbursed because the bank hasn't got its liquidity position in order. That's
Well,
the area.
I think that's a problem that given that that's a commercial bank under a commercial agreement from a commercial company, that it's not the government's to fix.
No,
I
no, I'm not
think
saying
they
it
just
is.
have to put their house in order if that were to
Sure.
arise.
I'm
I
not
don't,
saying it's for the government to fix. What I'm not at all. I mean, this has nothing to do with the government now. What I'm saying is that we need to, we need to figure some way, or maybe we don't. Maybe we just need to say, guys, you need to sort that out between yourselves. But I think if I were someone who was running that kind of operation, an airline, for instance, I would be very pissed off if my employees didn't get paid because my bank had failed to sort its position with Mojaloop out.
yeah, but what would that be? So my saying is that the bank to participate in Mojaloop has to have sorted its thing out. And that's not the challenge. That, sure, if you don't do it right, then the airline will choose a different bank, somebody who does do it right. But it's not a problem with the Mojaloop design.
Mm-hmm.
What we are saying is that there has to be a set of state transitions on a line by line basis that are true and that they indicate non-recourse. So there can't be a chaps or chips like capital call at the end of the day to go figure stuff out.
No, absolutely. Agreed.
Yeah, that's what we're trying. That's all I'm trying to get at. And it's like
Yeah.
if they're saying, "Oh, yes, there will be that," it's like, well, you guys have to sort it out. But when there's a reservation made in the scheme, this is what that means. It doesn't. It's not the best efforts, and we'll rewind it if it doesn't work. We're going to pay out for immediate finality to the end customer an amount that could exceed, $5 to $10 million, and you're on the hook for it. There's no figuring it out later. And so that's the strategy of design that I think we have to bring to it. It's going to be very painful, I think, for a lot of these guys who are used to doing wire transfers for moving these kinds of monies around. And the wire
Mm-hmm.
transfers all have this sort of capital call strategy at the end. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because exactly for what you said, it's like, the airline's good for it. Their account has it, but their bank fucked up and couldn't do the
Mm-hmm.
accounting at the end. So they ended up with a capital short at the end of the day. Um,
Absolutely.
That's why they have nine
Well,
pages of liquidity call from starting at 5 p.m., whereas the earlier parts of the CHAPS protocol are pretty straightforward.
yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And that's a reason, I think, for saying, our default position should be if all of the transfers can't be paid because of a liquidity problem, then none of them should be. because effectively you're putting lipstick on a pig if you say, well, we'll pay the ones we can and not the ones we can't. If I want to pay my payroll, I want to pay my payroll.
Yeah, I do think though that a campaign management is different from the
Yeah. Yeah.
execution.
No, I
And
agree
if the
with
bank is providing campaign management services, they can sort out all of the I can't pay him, but I can pay everybody else. They can do all of that up front before they mobilize the money.
that. We're talking about a
I
different
think,
situation
yeah.
here. We're not talking, and you're right. There will be a thing that says, sorry, his account's suspended. Sorry, her account's overbalanced, and you can't put any more funds in it, etc., etc. And that's perfectly okay. What we're talking about is a situation at the moment. We're saying if I submit 2,000 payroll transfers, and it turns out that I only have liquidity cover for 1,950 of them, then 50 people are going to go without their pay, but the other 1,950 won't. Or it
Yeah, no,
might
I'm
be the
with
other
you.
way.
Yeah, I get it. That can't arise. We need to be sure that the settlement accounts are properly funded and there's a link between the campaign management assurance to the payer uh, and the and the settlement system that the funds will be available. And so that when we run these payments through line by line, they're not failing for a liquidity test.
Yeah.
Um,
But at the moment, that is the
what
default
is the
position.
position?
The default position is that if you run 2,000 transfers, payroll transfers, and 50 of them fail the liquidity check, the other 1,950 get processed. So 1,950 people get paid and 50 people don't.
Right. So you should never allow that to arise, but it's not Mojaloop's fault or problem to solve, in my opinion.
Well, it's sorry, I agree, but what that means, the conclusion I draw from that is that if liquidity check fails, then the whole run should fail.
No, that's false. I think that there's a there is a strategy here that says the net debit cap is an assurance from the participant that they can settle, and there is a non-repudiation and non-recourse to that. And that, if you look at the accounting, uh, once you make that deposit against NDC, that becomes restricted money. You cannot withdraw it.
Yeah,
And so we need to be sure that if the money is not actually being placed on deposit at the commercial settlement account or at the central bank for the purposes of settling, that there is an equally strong guarantee that that money doesn't go missing or some part of it doesn't go missing.
absolutely.
That's part of the scheme design itself is to say, if I'm going to accommodate you in a different settlement model, it has to meet the same requirements, which is that a reservation is line by line. The aggregate of those reservations needs to meet the obligations to the campaign manager that if they submit this and say, I want to do the whole thing, and they believe they've given you appropriate guarantee through their net debit cap commitment, that you don't come up later and say, oh, well, when I tested it, it wasn't there. It's like I don't know what to do there except, well, then don't spend the money any other way. Um, I'm not sure what other tool we could give somebody at that point, as long as there's a commitment between the net debit cap and, good funds.
Well, the tool we could give them is the tool that says if you process, if you reserve for 950 of the payments, but then you run out of money, you should unreserve those 1,950 payments because you can't make the payroll run. There isn't enough liquidity.
But
Well,
this
look,
is just
you can place. The trouble is, it could be 10,000. You're placing 10,000 people at risk because they made an accounting mistake on one line item.
Yeah.
I think the issue isn't that at all. I think it's the design of the settlement system that's being used. Either
Mhm.
you can commit the funds or you can't commit them. And if you do commit them, then line by line reservation will not fail. And if it does, it should.
Yeah.
I would go
No,
that
no,
far.
I would agree. I agree with that. But the question is, I think it's a question of okay, it's a question of process that says you should be able to commit the funds when you should commit the funds. But my point is that if you don't commit the funds, then everything should stop because you didn't fulfill your part of the bargain.
Well, look, you can go back to them and say, look, I will do a bulk test against your liquidity standard before I even begin
Mm.
processing these payments as an extra line. You could do that, but that's
Yeah.
not a guarantee. We're not
But
going to
even that is
remove the
dynamic. Yeah.
reservations. We're not going to remove the settlement model criteria. We're just doing something extra up front, saying as a consequence of using the bulk interface, you get this magic thing for free, which
Mm.
is we'll run all 950 of these against your, we'll test your liquidity against the total sum of this batch.
No,
And
absolutely.
if it's,
Well, that would be
yeah,
great.
right. If it's not great, if your
Yeah.
balance isn't greater than or equal to, then we won't proceed. We'll come back with saying insufficient liquidity at the batch level,
Mm.
but we're not going to change any way that we process the individual line items. They could still fail in some random way.
Oh,
If
that's
you
good.
haven't really committed that money specifically to this batch, and if it's double committed, then we're not going to support double spend. So that means
Sure.
we have to fail a line.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay.
Sorry, someone was trying to say something, I think, and failing. Who was that? Was that you, Tim?
I think Miller covered that. Is I think the thinking there at the time was 2 points. Number one, even if we check at the beginning during the coding phase, let's say it's not a guarantee that it will be fulfilled later because few seconds might have passed and the position might have changed. The other one is it's not just a salary payments. Let's say a merchant wants to pay another uh, set of merchants, and they want to maximize the transactability and reduce the number that they are still the merchants that they're owed to. So they might still want the payments that can go through to go through. And the scenario where, like, to dramatize it a bit, let's say there are 10,000 and one account is not in good shape. Should we block the 9999 because of the one that is not in good shape? I think was the thinking at the time for this position.
Yeah. So all that says, I think, is that it should be possible for somebody, in particular, in this case, the participant, the DFSP, the debtor, the payer DFSP, to say either everything should go through or all the ones that can should go through.
I think we discussed that,
I
Michael.
think that
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that it's a choice to be made when you use the bulk interface, because I can imagine cases where, for my own convenience, I got a bunch of payments to make, but they're all really individual payments, and there's no real there's no reason to process them all or nothing.
Yeah, that's how bill payment agencies work, isn't it? Essentially, you pay a subscription and they pay that out to the people you owe money to.
Yeah, exactly
And
right.
nobody else
And
does it.
so in that case, it's not all or nothing, but it is a batch.
No,
It's
no,
way
no,
more
no.
efficient. But then in the case we've been discussing, all or nothing is the missing piece, is to
Yes.
say there's an additional convenience check up front that says all or nothing. You either have all the money committed or you don't, which is not a guarantee that it will proceed, but
Hmm.
it's basically it's a guarantee that it won't fail for lack of liquidity as an aggregate up front. That is, we're saying you apparently have enough to settle this. We can proceed.
Yeah. But it might still turn out that we don't.
Yeah, and line items can fail for, as Sam said, they could fail for a variety of reasons. Somebody's over limit or whatever else. They could also fail because the last 50, you seem to have run out of money because you were double spending and didn't tell us. And we can't do much about that except fail the payments. Um,
And my point is that those are fundamentally different kinds of things. Now,
they are,
it's
and they should be treated differently. And
yeah.
in fact, you hopefully never have that one
Mm.
occur because you did all the right things up front. But we do have to protect the nation scheme, the national scheme from, misbehaving commercial actors.
Yeah. Of whom there is a queue, I understand.
Mhm. I'm sorry, that was a redundancy, wasn't
It was rather.
it?
Okay, so while you guys have been talking, I've been trying to capture what's being said, and I just want to check to see if I have. So I added down here bulk functionality, updating the core enhancements. So potentially adding an option to support all or nothing or always proceed transfers the way it exists at the moment. And settlement. In our settlement discussion, it's not clear to me whether we do need any change to settlement. I think my understanding was that we didn't, that we were handling that already in settlement, and we had the options that were in place to be able to deploy a POC with that type of settlement model that we feel is appropriate.
Yeah, I
Well,
think. Sorry,
Yeah,
Miller.
oh yeah, so no, I think we need to test whether we have the sufficient functional capability to construct a settlement model that would be quite distinct for a government payer than the typical commercial interchange model that's used for DFSPs supporting retail payments. I
Well,
don't know whether we have sufficient functionality in the settlement system to do that. If we do, that's great. If we don't, then we should think about what would we do to the settlement system so that a settlement model of the kind we're describing could be constructed.
I think we do.
Fantastic. Then I would have said, rather than update settlement, should we say something like confirm or,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's
Well,
like,
yeah, as you say, we should wireframe this, but I think we can do it. And I think maybe what we should be doing is working with Phil to see if we could wireframe something that we could show to Zambia.